If you've ever had troubles getting your nitrates under control in your planted tank, maybe that's too little nitrates, or in today's case, too many nitrates, then this episode of In-Depth Solutions is for you. Hello everyone, this is Bentley. Welcome to the second episode of In-Depth Solutions. Today we're going to be talking about problems with nitrates in aquariums. Specifically, we're going to look at Jenna's tank. She was dealing with some issues, especially early on we were looking at very high nitrates. So about 50 ppm is what our tests were reading, and kind of figuring out how to control that. Now let's talk a few of the things about the scenario here and what's going on. And while we do that, we'll have a few pictures. Okay, so here's our scenario. Jenna's dealing with a tank that is in Seattle area water, so very similar to mine. There's a few differences, but they're very, very minute. In general, she's using some additives to help buffer the water, using Easy Green fertilizer, and also has kind of a half DIY, if you will, CO2 that's using baking soda and citric acid. So if you've seen those kits on Amazon or something like that, this is the type of CO2 we're using. Okay. Problem is we're continuously seeing very high nitrates. So let's look at water parameters. And I'll put the list up here just so you can see them as I talk. She did mention she was having a little bit of trouble reading her kits, and we go through the pictures. There's a little bit of video too. We can look at them and kind of eyeball it for ourselves. But you'll notice, like anybody, it can be a little hard to definitively read them if you haven't done this a ton. So the tank was looking at nitrates about 50. Nitrite 0, ammonia 0, no chlorine, pH somewhere between 6.8 and 7.2, so very, very nice neutral pH, that's great. GH hardness of 75 and KH buffer of 80 roughly. These are all really, really good. You could go a little harder in theory with your GH, but you start getting too hard and certain plants will struggle. Now out of the tap, nitrate 0, nitrite 0, GH and hardness, or GH and KH, GH hardness, 25 and 40, and the pH about 6.4, and then after 25 hours of the air stone, very, very similar reading. So we're not losing anything to any kind of gas off. So there's no compound in there that we're going to lose, or some kind of pH crash because there's not enough carbonate hardness or something in there that's going to help maintain the stability of our water. So our water is really stable. More importantly, if we're looking at our tests, the nitrates out of the tap are 0. Okay, we've got some plants that we've been dealing with. We had some Sediment octopus that was getting a little too stemmy, so we decided to go away from that. And not getting that nice lush growth, which can be common if it's not getting a lot of CO2 or if it's just not absorbing a ton of fertilizer. We're doing a pretty regular fertilization scheme. So let's talk to plants. We got dwarf water lettuce, red roof floaters, some duckweed, a lot of floating plants, right? Some crypts, some anubias, java fern, dwarf water lily. Love that plant. 4 boosts, some hygrophila. I think that's supposed to be Sessiliflora. And then Ludwigia repens, a personal favorite of mine. I love that stem. Easy Green liquid ferts, and as well as the Aquarium Co-op root tabs. Local to this area. Of course, you're going to go up to Aquarium Co-op. I would not fault you at all for making that choice. And then the tank's heated to around 78, 79 degrees. We're using a Fluval 3.0 light with the following settings. 20 gallon, keep in mind this is a 20 gallon tall. So we're not talking a really huge tank, not really high tank. So these settings being a little lower makes sense, and we're not doing super high amounts of CO2. So it also makes sense that we're having a little lower setting. So our settings here on that light, gotta get back to that light settings. I had them right here. Settings on the light. Bam. Red 35%, blue 10%. The cold white and pure white at 40% and warm white at 45% with the light on for 8 hours. I would say that's a really good setting, especially for DIY CO2, not a super tall tank, no super high demand plants, but potentially with all those floaters, we might be cutting a little too much light to the plants underneath. So one of the reasons that your Sediment octopus and some of those plants can get a little leggy, a little stemmy, where they're not quite as dense and they're really long, is that they're reaching up for light. So those can be, despite being an easy to grow plant, a little light demanding when they're getting a little bit of CO2. They really want all those excess nutrients. They want to process, so they want that extra light. So this is one thing we might be looking at. Now here's where a problem comes, and Jenna actually figured this out on her own while I was emailing her. Basically, like, she had sent me an email the morning that I was going to respond after we had some back and forth. because I had several questions, and we'll go over those in a sec. But you put this in your head for a second, and you'll probably figure out one of the answers to our problem here is that we're doing water changes, and we're not seeing the nitrites change. But we know our tap water, our source water, is 0. And she's doing 25% water changes, about 5-gallon buckets. She does it by the bucket just because that's all she's got right now. She gets some help from her husband to do some of those at times. But more importantly, like we're doing a 25% water change. So we're at 50 nitrates and we're changing out 25% of our water. We should be diluting that down a little bit and seeing some kind of change, especially if we're doing weekly water changes, which is what we're looking at here. So I asked several questions. Let's get into those. Because they give us some extra details that really answers... she even gave me like full feeding regimes and everything. I mean, she gave me a novel, which is fantastic because it helps really dive into what's going on. But you're going to find out really fast that while that information is super relevant, it's not what tells us the answer. So the first one is that light thing. There's a potential that we're actually, because of the floating plants, pulling too much light away from some of those stems. Now, all the crypts and nubias, all that kind of stuff, they love being shaded. They're going to do fantastic that way. That's great. But some of the stems that are getting a little leggy and we're not happy with that, that might be our problem. And she did mention that she changed plants. Also, is a Final Fantasy XIV fan, which, as you guys know, Papa Limo, named for a Final Fantasy XIV character. I used to play a lot of Final Fantasy. So I had a few questions I was answering at first. Because she had several, and basically that, can we prevent pH crashes with our water here in Seattle without adding a lot of additives and then having some kind of swings, if you will, where you've got this water that's extremely soft coming into harder water and not trying to get the water too hard to where it's an issue. And basically the short answer there was kind of, but it's not easy. And what's going on really is that, like, as you add that water, it dilutes down a little bit. It's not enough of a change to really affect your fish. They've been doing well for a while. You're not super hard. Don't stress too much about it. You're doing okay. And I kind of mentioned, like, how soft are you really looking to go with your water? Because honestly, your numbers look fine. Some of your plants might be struggling, and there's some other variables to this, like, little equation that we're trying to figure out that I think are more the problem. And we discussed that a little bit. And then finally, nitrates around 50. This is a thing where it's like, this is what's weird. This is what's weird. So I gave her a couple plans, is that I wanted to ask how we're doing the Easy Green. I wanted to know exactly how we're dosing it, whether we're spreading those doses out or we're doing our 2 doses. She did mention that she doses more than once a week, but those are the things I asked. And then finally she did ask, I know this isn't relevant, but if GSAS was going to have in-person meetings sometime soon. Funny note. I wanted to go over it. So, she came to me with some answers, give me some extra info. Here's what we really learned. Here's the important part. Put my phone away. We don't need it anymore. The same time I was answering, she had already, had the eureka moment. If we're at 50 nitrates and we're doing a water change and nothing is changing when we then test again, something's up. That doesn't make any logical sense. So what did she do? Jenna went out, bought herself, she was using the Aquarium Co-op test strips. She did give me the caveat that she had the very first test batch, so only available to the members, early test batch of test strips before they were officially on sale at the website. Which one? Cool, you got to experience the test process. You got to do something I do for a living every day. And then 2, you got to experience the test process. And what did we find out? She went out and bought an API Master freshwater kit, and comparing it, realized that the results are off. The nitrate pads were reading falsely on the test kit. Now, thankfully, she mentioned she went to Aquarium Co-op. They totally replaced them. They had no problem. They were like, yep, not a problem. Here you go. Here's replacements. Sorry that happened to you. So in testing, what we're looking at is that her nitrate levels were actually fine. And one of the things that we could be looking at is if we had these elevated nitrate levels for a long period of time, we probably should have seen something in our fish, but all of our fish look pretty healthy. And we're seeing some plants have some minor issues. We have a ton of floating plants. These are very aggressive nitrate hogs. We're still having high nitrates, right? We have all these warning bells kind of going off telling us, logically speaking, no matter what that test tells us, something ain't right. That doesn't make sense. And I know somebody's going to be like, that's some terrible English, Bentley. That's the point, right? It's just how your brain kicks in and just goes, No, sir. I don't like it. Right? So, here's what we would do if we really did have a nitrate issue. The first thing we would look at doing, water changes. Bigger water changes or more frequent water changes. Dilution is the solution. This is an old school kind of methodology, philosophy, call it what you will, an adage, but dilution is the solution. More water changes, higher amounts, or just more frequently to dilute that down, especially when we know that source water has 0 nitrate in it. So we can dilute that nitrate away and help deal with that problem. Now, let's say that we have tap water that does have nitrates in it. Maybe your tap has 50 nitrates naturally, and you have a lot of slow-growing plants. How the heck do we bring that down so that every water change we're not bringing in too much nitrate? Maybe we need to have, because we have a heavier fish load or something like that, we need to have some big water changes. How do we deal with that? So let me give you a couple options. Here's where we're going to talk about other solutions, because what we found out is our problem was a test kit. And just eventually stop trusting your test kit. If logic tells you, like, hey, I'm doing water changes and my nitrates should change some, and they're not changing, look at your test. Maybe look at doing another test, whether that's take water into a store that does water testing for you for free, whether that's going out and like, hey, when did I buy that API freshwater kit, or when did I buy those test strips? How long do they last? Maybe they've expired. Maybe they're a little close to being less effective. Now, I would argue that most of those things actually stay effective for a very long time. You shouldn't worry too much. It's really infrequent that this occurs. However, use some logic. Don't be afraid to question the test, because honestly, tests aren't everything. Yeah, testing is very important. Do not get me wrong. But don't 100% believe everything on that test strip or in that test kit if all the other signs point to that's not the problem. Okay? That's more what I'm saying. It's like a thing that we say is like, how do you know your tank is cycled? Do you look at the tests, or do you look at, well, is algae growing in my aquarium? Are all my plants growing? Have I had this thing set up for a month and I went through diatom algae and I don't have diatoms anymore and I'm getting little bits of green dust algae here and there? Your tank's probably cycled if that's what's going on. But if your test kit tells you, like, in 2 days, you've got nothing in your water whatsoever, you might not be cycled, despite the fact that test kit's telling you your water's perfectly fine. You should be able to put fish in it. You might not even really started the nitrogen cycle at this point, but your test kit says you're okay, right? We need to trust a few things beyond just exactly what that test kit tells us. The test kit is a tool to help give us additional information, not an all-telling oracle that will tell us everything we ever need to know and ignore every other sign, right? That's the important lesson here. So, let's say we have high nitrates out of the tap, out of our well, whatever it may be, our source water. How do we deal with that? Well, if you only have one tank, a really easy solution, if you have some space, this is what I want to preface, is get one of those, like, plastic totes, you know, the black, I think they're a Husky-made tote or whatever. You can find them at, like, Home Depots and stuff, the big plastic bins that have the yellow lids, right? Or any kind of water-holding tote that's reasonable, that holds enough water to be a significant water change for your tank. Keep some floating plants. I would suggest something like wisteria or dwarf water lettuce is fine. Anything like that where you can, it doesn't really need a lot of light. Ambient light through a window is enough, but aerate it so that it doesn't get stale. It's staying oxygenated, and let those plants naturally absorb that nitrates for a few days. So what you do is you pour your water in there, you get it to whatever temp, and I know this is a little complicated setup. I totally understand that, but trust me, this is a great way to do these kind of things. It helps, especially if you're only dealing with one tank. Now, if you're dealing with lots of tanks, we'll have other solutions for that. So you'll put this together, and basically you'll just mature your water, so to speak. You'll let it sit there for a few days, let those plants absorb some of those nitrates, and then let's say that the day that you do your water change, you pull your water out, you'll put fresh water in from your tap, let those plants do their job. That way, when it comes time for your next water change, you've got this nice seasoned water, if you will, ready to go for you. And it can go into your tank, and it's already dealt with a lot of those nitrates, so that if you have a more lower demand tank, that water can go in, you can fertilize as you would normally. But let's say you're doing 10 tanks, 15 tanks, or you have very large tanks and this just isn't feasible. Now we want to start looking at something like a sediment filter or a carbon block filter to help remove some of those things. You could also go all the way to like reverse osmosis, so an RODI unit, and remineralizing your water. If you have extreme mineral content and you're trying to go way softer or something like that, this is an option you should be looking into. But you can get away with a lot less, just basically the DI side of your RODI unit, in some more simpler filtration, running your water through that, and that'll pull a lot of those extra things out of the water to help make it a little easier. This is especially the case if you're trying to get rid of your chlorine, for example, or maybe even chloramine. You run it through a carbon block, it's going to take care of most of that for you. You don't necessarily have to use something like your CChem Safe or Fritz Complete or any of those things, right? Your dechlorinators. Also, it can help deal with, some of your other nasty, like if you have potentially some metals or something like that, because maybe you have an older water heater, or maybe some very old pipes in your house and you're a little worried about that. This is a great way to take care of those. A sediment filter into carbon block filters will take care of a lot of that extra stuff in your water and make it a little easier to handle in your aquarium. That's it. This is a really simple one. Sometimes we can dig really deep into these in-depth solutions and the answer is very simple. Sometimes I even get beat to the punch. We'll get all these details. We'll gather all this information. Now we're ready. Okay, I've got this game plan. Something seems fishy, though. Turns out the person who needed help figured it out at the same time. And that's what's really awesome, is that logic, you just apply that logic, you just think for that extra second and go, wait, this doesn't seem right. Something doesn't seem right. Let me think about this logically for a second. What if this is the problem? What if that test kit's reading wrong? How do I figure that out? Go get a different test kit or take it to a store that can do the test for me and make sure that they're seeing the same results I am. If they're seeing something different, now we know something's up and we now need to question the test kit, right? It might be expired, whatever it may be. Question that and know that maybe our water's in a lot better shape than we think it is, and we don't need to worry quite as much as we have been. So with that being said, this is a little shorter one, a little easier one. Big kudos to Jenna for figuring stuff out. Just applying the old noodle, figuring it out. Good on you. Also, awesome that you're a local Seattleite. I hope that when meetings come back into play, we get to meet in person and just have a little chat. Say hi. Be friendly, right? Be fish nerds in the glorious Pacific Northwest. For the rest of you, if you've enjoyed this, like little takes like this, in-depth solutions, the original, like how to become a part of in-depth solutions and get my help directly. No BS. You're actually getting it direct from me. That's going to be up in the corner, and in the end cards today, you'll have the video that teaches you everything you need to know about how to submit for my help. If you enjoy these things, give it a little like, the old thumbs up, just nice little tap. You don't got to beat it up, nothing not too violent, all right? Come on, we're nice people in the fish world, except for those cichlid people. You know who you are. You know who you are. But seriously, if you guys enjoyed this, give it a like. Let me know down in the comments below. Did you learn anything from this? Have you had an experience like this? Have you had a test kit go bad and it was telling you like your ammonia is way high, and you like cycled the tank for 6 months and you're like, this can't be possible. This has to be cycled by now, only to find out it's wrong? I'd love to hear from you guys down in the comments. If this is your first time viewing this and you think, I kind of like getting advice like this, consider subscribing. Maybe even just give that notification bell a nudge. That way you don't miss another video like this, whether it's in-depth solutions, our live streams every Tuesday, all sorts of other fish-related stuff from this crazy idiot right here. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.